Banks are hardly open. Pay is postponed. Half-stocked supermarket shelves. However, it's not a film, it's real. Consider this not only for a single nation, but for entire areas. Plummeting into economic collapse. The dominoes begin to fall with one incorrect policy and one late payment. Disappearing foreign exchange reserves due to war inflation. Some governments are using borrowed time and unfulfilled promises to play financial Jenga. Which countries are struggling? Which ones might fail before 2026 ever comes around? This has nothing to do with a recession. Stick around, this is about collapsing. Because the economies of these 10 nations might not be able to endure past 2026. Number 5. Sudan. Farmland in Sudan was abundant not long ago. Oil routes and possibilities. Now vast cities that have been destroyed by conflict sit in silence. Khartoum's once bustling metropolis has been reduced to a shell, with its electricity grids decimated. Water systems broke down. The cost of rebuilding hospitals that are barely operating. Up to $1 trillion in U.S. currency. However, this is a nation engulfed in debt, not merely a battle zone. With a ratio of more than 250% for debt to GDP. Millions of people are displaced. Food shortages are getting worse. Their primary exports are gold and agricultural products. Can no longer bear the burden. Hence the question is, how does a country rebuild when its internal economy has already fallen apart? Even if the battle ends, the economic catastrophe could last for years. Is Sudan on the verge of the next major global economic collapse? Look again if you believe that collapses only occur in the news. Sudan is already breaking since it is not waiting for 2026. Number 4. Lebanon. It remains stunning from Beirut's coastline. Lively marketplaces. Sea breeze. Every street has traces of its past. But if you look more closely, Lebanon is clearly disintegrating. This nation has already fallen behind on more than U.S. foreign debt of $0 billion. Savings are frozen by banks. The value of the currency has dropped by more than 90%. And things become worse. Political deadlock results in no plan, no president, and no reforms. According to World Bank projections, more than $11 billion US are required, only to rebuild following the recent conflict and the port explosion. Hours pass during power outages. Whole paychecks are spent on groceries. The other half of the population is barely surviving, and half of them live in poverty. Is this only a crisis, or is the once thriving economy slowly dying? Hit the subscribe button before we move on to the next nation. It enables us to continue producing content of this caliber, and we assure you that what comes next is even more startling. Number 3. Sri Lanka. Beaches with palm trees and ancient temples. Sri Lanka still seems like an ideal vacation spot on the surface. However, beneath the picturesque exterior, the economy is collapsing. Silently and methodically. The government ran out of foreign currency just 3 years ago, which meant there was no fuel. No imports, no medication. By 2022, the lights had literally gone out. For the first time in history, Sri Lanka had fallen behind on its foreign debt. Households were forced because despite the International Monetary Fund's assistance. The fundamental issue is that the government borrowed a lot of money, spent it carelessly, and gambled on unprofitable economic theories. You may be asking yourself, haven't things started to improve? The debt load is still enormous. Foreign reserves are hardly enough to last a few months. Food prices are still unstable, and tourism is still crept up a little. But a worldwide oil increase, another shock, or a failing monsoon. Political upheaval might cause everything to collapse once more, and the harsh reality is that recovery hinges on significant, unpopular changes. Reduced government spending, privatized utilities, and increased taxation. These are not election-winning issues, but they are the cost of living for common people, meaning they must pay more and receive less, which causes their rupee to depreciate. Their hope and savings go recovering and fragile. In a technical sense, growth hasto live on rations, schools were forced to close, hospitals turned away patients, and as of 2025, the nation was still just scraping by. Fade the question now is whether Sri Lanka is recovering or simply stalling before the next collapse, as the current state of calm may not continue much longer, and there may not be a second bailout if the nation is unable to pay its debts, improve its administration, and restore trust from the ground up. Number 2. Venezuela. It was once the wealthiest nation in South America, with oil flowing through its cities and booming. And Caracas was teeming with desire and a business culture. But today's Venezuela paints a totally different picture. Previously crowded with cars, the streets are now quiet, hospitals are operating without basic supplies, and millions of Venezuelans have fled one of the worst economic disasters outside of war in modern history. It all began with oil, and Venezuela now controls the greatest known reserves on the planet, but an over-reliance on oil and the inability to. The trap was set by reinvesting revenues into other industries, followed by price regulations, government corruption, and poor management, which by 2017 had devastated local industry. Even though inflation has decreased recently, the damage is long-lasting. Wages are essentially worthless. Foreign exchange is used more than the belief that over 90% of the population now lives in poverty, and prices double every few weeks. This is where it becomes even more concerning. Informally, the government has begun dollarizing the economy, but without significant structural reforms that would only buy time. Infrastructure is collapsing, and most foreign investors will not touch Venezuela with a 10-foot pole. What comes next? Will political negotiations finally unlock international aid? Or will a new round of sanctions, internal power struggles, or declining oil prices cause yet another plunge? For now, Venezuelans are barely making ends meet, trading necessities on WhatsApp, growing food in makeshift gardens, and depending on family members overseas to send money. However, this is not just a crisis, it is a warning. Please remember to subscribe before we move on to the next nation. That way, we can continue to provide you with insightful, impactful stuff like this. And you might be even more surprised by what comes next on this list. Number 1. Pakistan. It seems like a headline from the economic crisis and energy shortages 10 years ago. Political unrest is not history for Pakistan. It is happening now and getting worse. If you look past the bustling streets of Islamabad and Lahore, you will see a nation that is overburdened, with factories closing for days due to a lack of electricity, students walking miles to barely functional schools, and a rapidly declining middle class. Pakistan has more than $125 billion in debt, which is due to overseas lenders. The country's foreign exchange reserves recently fell to such a low level that they could not cover even a month's worth of imports. But the fundamental problem is that it continues to rely on temporary bailouts rather than long-term reform. The International Monetary Fund intervenes, sets terms, makes a payment, and then nothing happens. Inflation, rising fuel costs, and rising food prices hangs in the double digits for the typical household, which entails removing children from school, skipping meals, and skipping medication in order to survive. It's not only the economy either. Your one click equals big support. Subscribe now. Collision.